filters give you the freedom to have a bit more control over your camera. Alright guys, welcome back to my channel. Thank you for tuning in. Today I will be reviewing or unboxing a ND filter kit that I ordered from a company called Urth. This kit cost me about $90 US and it includes a ND8, ND64 and an ND1000. Yeah, I'm quite impressed with it, so I thought I'll do a little video about the unboxing of this filter kit. Go check them out. It's Urth, U-R-T-H. You can find out all the information on their website. So looking at this box already, it's got a good feel to it. The filter is surrounded by this soft, spongy material and really decent packaging. Once you take it out, this is where the magic really happens. It comes in a little kit like this. I have my 3 ND filters basically squashed in between 2 caps. If you need one of them, let's say for example my ND64 is in the middle, I can just find the one that I want to use and I can unscrew it. I can remove my ND64 to use on my lens, and then I can just close these 2 up again and drop that in my bag. So it's a really thought out technique to keep everything together. No need for little sleeves to put each individual filter in. You can just keep them all together and they are protected. What I would like to do is I'd like to go outside and go and test them. The main thing I'm concerned about is some vignetting around the edges and to see if we're losing any of the colors or the clarity. Let's get outside and see if these things are actually as good as they look. I'm not a professional photographer, I'm still learning, so as much as I'm reviewing this ND filter, I'm also doing this as a test and for me to educate myself. Okay, so let's talk about shutter speed quickly. According to the gurus on YouTube and in the filmmaking industry, best shutter speed to have is double your frame rate. So if you're shooting in 24 frames per second, then your shutter speed according to the 180 rule should be 1/48, and when you have your shutter speed set at twice your frame rate, you will get that natural motion blur. I'm in program auto now, 1/500 shutter speed. My aperture is f5.6, ISO 125. So if I do motion blur test, just moving my hand, that's going to look very jittery compared to a shutter speed that is twice your frame rate. So Aperture basically controls the light that comes into your camera as well, or into your lens. That also controls your depth of field. So at a low f-stop, your subject will be in focus, and whatever's behind your subject will have that blurry background, or what they call bokeh background. At the moment with these settings, f5.6, I don't think there's going to be much bokeh behind me here. So in saying that, I'm not 100% sure how all this technical stuff works. I just know if I want to brighten up my exposure, then I either adjust my ISO, or if I want to darken the exposure, then I want to lower my ISO. Sometimes you've lowered your ISO, but it's still too bright, and that's when you start adjusting your aperture or your shutter speed. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm now going to put my ND64 on the lens, and then we'll see what adjustments the camera will make to compensate for the light reduction. And then we'll also have a look at the depth of field, the blurry background, and then we'll do another motion blur test. So here we go. I'm still in program auto, but now I have the ND64 on the lens, and the automatic settings have now changed to shutter speed 1/125. My aperture is at f1.8 and my ISO at 200. So we can clearly see now that the depth of field has changed. We've got a much blurrier background, and the motion blur should not be too bad. Okay guys, so we are back in full manual mode. This is my preferred settings. 1/50 shutter speed, aperture at 1.8, and my ISO at 125. So we can see a nice blurry background, and we're going to see nice and natural motion blur. This is with the Urth ND64 natural density filter. So I want to do 2 more tests just out of curiosity. I'm quite enjoying sort of exploring with this and actually like teaching myself a little bit more about ND filters too. So I want to take this ND filter off, and then I want to choose aperture priority, and I also want to choose shutter priority. And then if I'm in aperture priority, I want to see how much the camera will actually crank up that shutter speed, which means we will lose all the motion blur, the natural motion blur. And then in shutter priority, I will choose my shutter priority at 1/50, which means we'll keep the motion blur, but we will lose all the nice blurry background, the depth of field. So yeah, that's going to be the last 2 tests, and then I think we can conclude this. I've learned a lot playing with this ND filters, and I don't see any vignetting around the corners. It looks pretty good to me, and the settings or the profile that I'm shooting in on the Sony ZV-1 is just the picture profile off, so it's the Sony colors just in the camera. I might do a little bit of color grading. I'll have a look when I put it all on my computer, but for the most of it I just want to keep it probably straight out of camera, and that way we can do a more accurate comparison. So yeah, let's get into aperture priority and shutter priority. Okay, so we are in aperture priority. I've taken off the ND filter, and what's happened here now is we've kept the blurry background. So we've got the nice blurry background. Our aperture is fixed on 1.8, but our shutter speed has now jumped up all the way to 1/5000 to compensate for all this light and bright conditions. So the shutter speed is super fast now. So if we do a motion blur test, my hand is going to look super jittery, and it's not going to look natural. We can see now how these ND filters open up possibilities to change your footage and change or customize the look that you really want to go for. So I'm going to change now to shutter priority, Okay, so we are now in shutter priority. Our shutter is at 1/50. The camera has chosen the aperture at f11, which I assume is the maximum aperture for the Sony ZV-1. I'm not 100% sure, but if it wasn't, it would up it a little bit more to compensate for all the light that's coming into the lens. Okay, so what I can do now is, because I am in shutter priority, I can adjust my shutter 1/80, and that looks a little bit better. I think I'm still a bit overexposed. 1/100, 1/125. We've basically lost all the blurry background. That's pretty much in focus as well, or maybe there's a slight background blur. The higher your aperture, the less depth of field or the less blurry background. So that's interesting, and this is without the ND filter on. Obviously the Sony ZV-1 has a built-in ND filter, but I have found that if you want to keep your shutter speed as low as possible and your aperture as low as possible, you do need to add some extra ND filters. Alright guys, so that concludes my little test on the Urth ND filter kit. This has been really fun, and also I learned a lot. So I hope you guys learned something as well. If you did learn something, then just give this video a like as well. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers.